A cartoon once showed Jesus going to the bathroom on the American flag during the holiest week of the Christian year, and the network aired it without blinking. The same show said the cruelest word in the English language out loud more than 40 times with no bleep at all. It mocked presidents, popes, movie stars, and even an entire country to its face. Yet there was one single thing this show was never allowed to do. It could not show one quiet drawing of one religious figure. When it tried, its own network reached in and blacked out the screen and then made the episodes disappear for good. That one strange rule, hidden under more than 20 years of jokes, explains every battle South Park ever fought and every time it was forced to back down. And the reason comes down to a single thing: fear. Welcome to East Park. Let's get into it. The show that set out to make fun of everyone. South Park started small. Two friends from college, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, made a rough little cartoon about four foul-mouthed boys living in a quiet mountain town in Colorado. Before there was ever a television show, there were a couple of short videos they made by hand. The one that changed their lives was a crude little holiday short about Jesus and Santa Claus fighting each other. An executive in the television business paid them to make it as a kind of video Christmas card he could send to friends. People started copying it and passing it around, first on tapes and then across the early internet, until an enormous number of strangers had seen it. This was years before sharing videos online was normal, so a homemade cartoon spreading that far was almost unheard of. The buzz around that short was what convinced Comedy Central to give the two of them a real show, which first aired in the summer of 1997. The look of it was strange and simple, almost like paper shapes being slid around on a table, because that is close to how the very first version was made. The earliest short had been built by cutting out little figures from colored construction paper and moving them tiny bits at a time, snapping a picture of each pose. The show itself was soon made with computers, but the computers were told to copy that same cheap paper cutout style on purpose. Another unusual thing set it apart behind the scenes. Most cartoons take many months to make a single episode, but Parker and Stone built theirs at a blazing speed, often finishing an episode in about a week. That speed would matter enormously later, since it let them respond to real events almost as they happened, and it meant that by the time anyone powerful wanted to stop an episode, it was usually already done. Nobody at the time thought any of it would last very long. It looked too cheap and too rude to become anything big. But the rudeness was the whole point. From the start, Parker and Stone built the show around one clear idea. No person, no group, no belief was going to be off the table. If they made fun of one religion, they would make fun of the next one too. If they poked at one famous person, they would poke at the rest. The rule they kept repeating, in interviews and behind the scenes, was that everything was fair game. That promise became the heart of the show. It was the thing fans loved about it, and the thing that would get the show into trouble again and again for the next 30 years. In the early days, the trouble was mostly small. Parents groups were upset that kids were watching a cartoon where children swore, and where one of the boys, Kenny, died in almost every single episode. Teachers and news anchors warned families to keep their children away from it. Some schools banned children from wearing shirts with the characters on them, and watchdog groups that kept an eye on television singled the show out as one of the worst things on the air. None of that stopped it. If anything, the noise made more people curious, and the audience kept growing. Parker and Stone learned a lesson early that would shape everything they did later. When people tried to shut them down, the attention often made the show stronger. The first real test of how far they could push came in 1999, when they made a full movie. It was a big jump. A television cartoon on a cable channel could get away with a lot, but a movie shown in theaters across the country had to pass through a much stricter door first. Every movie that wants a normal release has to be looked at by a group that decides what age people should be to watch it. That group gives each film a label. Some labels are friendly to families. The harshest common label means no one under 17 is allowed in at all, and most big theaters refuse to show films that carry it, which can quietly kill a movie before it ever reaches an audience. Parker and Stone had already been burned by that harsh label once. An earlier, smaller film they made had been slapped with it, and when they asked what they needed to cut to soften it, the ratings group would not tell them. They were left guessing, with no clear way to fix the problem. That stuck with them. Years later, Matt Stone talked about how strange and unfair the whole system felt, calling the ratings group a bumbling and irresponsible bunch. Going into the South Park movie, they knew the fight was coming, and this time they had a large studio standing behind them, which meant that for once the group did give them specific notes about what to change. The fight started before anyone even saw a single scene. It started with the title. The movie was first called South Park All Hell Breaks Loose. The ratings group did not like the word hell sitting right there in the name, so Parker and Stone changed it. The new title became South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. On the surface, it sounded like a simple description description of a movie that was bigger than an episode and longer than an episode. Underneath, it was a dirty joke hiding in plain sight. The kind of thing a child would read one way and an adult would read another. The people who forced the change had asked for something cleaner and ended up with something sneakier. Then came the movie itself, and the back and forth was long and tiring. The film was shown to the ratings group around 6 separate times. 5 of those times, it came back with the harsh label, the one that would have stopped it from playing in most theaters. The last of those rejections landed only about 2 weeks before the movie was supposed to open. With the release date almost on top of them, the studio called Parker and Stone and told them plainly that they needed the softer rating, the one that lets younger people in as long as a parent comes along. Without it, the movie was in real danger. So they went back in and made changes. They trimmed and reshaped jokes to get past the door. The funny part, looking back, is how they did it. Many times, instead of softening a joke to make it pass, they made it sharper and stranger so it would slip through. They turned the whole process into a game of seeing how much they could keep while still squeaking by. In the end, the movie got the rating it needed and opened in theaters, but it was filthier than almost anything in its class. For years afterward, it held a world record for the most swearing ever packed into an animated film, with around 400 curse words crammed into a story that was barely longer than an hour, along with dozens of rude gestures and a long list of violent moments. One single song in the movie repeated the same bad word more than 30 times in a row, almost like a dare. What made the film matter, beyond all the swearing, was what it was actually about. The whole thing was built as a musical, with the boys and the grown-ups breaking into full songs the way characters do in a stage show. The story follows the 4 boys as they sneak into a rude movie made by 2 crude Canadian characters they love. After the boys come home repeating everything they heard, the grown-ups decide the movie has poisoned their children. The parents do not look at themselves. They do not look at how little attention they pay to their own kids. They look for something to blame, and they blame the movie, and the cartoon characters who made it, and the country those characters came from. Their anger grows until it tips into something huge and ridiculous, with the United States marching toward war with Canada over a couple of cartoon comedians, while down in the underworld, the devil himself carries on a strange romance with a real-world dictator. The whole film was a mirror held up to the people fighting against it. While the ratings group was busy trying to scrub the movie clean, the movie was busy laughing at exactly that kind of behavior. At one point, a mother in the story, deep in her crusade to protect the children, more or less repeats the strange logic of the rating system out loud. She points out that terrible, bloody violence seems to be perfectly fine as long as nobody says any naughty words. That line was a direct jab at the people who had spent months worrying about swearing in a cartoon while barely blinking at the buckets of cartoon violence all around it. Parker and Stone had taken the argument being used against them and dropped it right into the movie for everyone to hear. The timing made all of this land harder. The movie came out in the summer of 1999, only a couple of months after a terrible shooting at a high school had shaken the whole country. In the weeks that followed, many adults were anxious and looking for reasons, and a lot of the blame got pointed at movies, music, and video games. The fear was that this kind of entertainment was making young people violent. Into that nervous, finger-pointing moment walked a loud, crude cartoon movie aimed squarely at the very parents who were doing the blaming. It was almost the worst possible time to release something like it, and also, in a strange way, the most fitting time, because the movie was about that exact panic. The reaction was loud, as expected. Some critics laughed and admitted the movie was clever even while it offended them. Others were disgusted. The head of the ratings group, looking back later, actually said he wished he had given the film the harsher label after all, which meant that even after letting it through, the people in charge felt they had been outsmarted. The year after the movie came out, that same ratings group changed the way it labeled films. It started adding short notes explaining why a movie got the rating it did, partly because films like this one had made people wonder whether the ratings could really be trusted. One of the movie songs, a cheerful tune that blamed Canada for everything, was even nominated for the Academy Awards, the most respected honor in all of film. A strange prize for a number stuffed with insults aimed at a whole country. Underneath the noise and the jokes, this first big battle taught Parker and Stone something they would lean on for the rest of the show's life. They could not always win by getting everything they wanted on screen. The people above them, the studios and the ratings groups, and later the networks, would sometimes say no, but there was another kind of winning available to them. They could take the act of being told no and turn it into the story. They could show the censoring inside the very thing being censored, and let the audience see the silliness of it. A blocked title became a dirtier title. A long fight over a rating became a movie about people who pick fights over the wrong things. Every time someone tried to cover their mouth, they found a way to make shake that hand part of the show. The promise they had made at the beginning that everyone was fair game was now bigger than ever. The movie had stretched that promise to the limit and survived. It had aimed at parents, at the ratings group, at a whole nation up north, and at the easily offended everywhere. And it had come out the other side with a record for bad language and an award nomination at the same time. For a while, it must have felt like nothing could really stop them. They had pushed against the strictest gate in the business and walked through it, bruised but standing. That confidence would carry them straight back to television and into a stranger kind of fight. The next time they wanted to break a rule, the battle would not be about a title or a rating. It would be about a single rude word. The plan was to take that word and say it out loud, over and over, more times than anyone watching could count, until the people whose whole job was deciding what can be said on television had no choice left but to react. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That confidence would carry them straight back to television, and it would carry them right into a stranger fight, because the next time they wanted to break a rule, it would not be about a title or a rating. It would be about a single ugly word, and the plan would be to say that word out loud, over and over, more times than anyone watching could count, until the people who decide what can be said on television had no choice but to react. Section 2. 200 bad words and a counter in the corner. By the summer of 2001, the show had found its feet. The movie was 2 years behind them, the audience had grown, and Parker and Stone had settled into a fast, steady rhythm of making new episodes. Season 5 was about to begin, and they opened it with an episode that would become one of the most talked about things they ever did. It was not famous for a clever story or a sad ending. It was famous for a single rude word, and for how many times that word was said out loud. To understand why this mattered, it helps to know how television worked back then. On the big, free channels that anyone could pick up with an antenna, there were strict rules from the government about what could be said. Certain words were simply not allowed, and breaking those rules could cost the channel a lot of money. Comedy Central was not one of those free channels. It was a cable channel, the kind people paid extra for, and cable channels had more freedom. The government did not police their words in the same way. Even so, these channels still held themselves back. They had their own teams whose whole job was to decide what was too far. They worried about upsetting advertisers, the companies that paid to run commercials, and they worried about angry letters and bad headlines. So even on a channel that legally could have allowed almost anything, a lot was still quietly kept off the air out of caution. That caution is exactly what Parker and Stone decided to poke at. The episode they made is called It Hits the Fan, and the whole thing is built around one crude word, a rude word for going to the bathroom, the kind of word that television had spent decades carefully bleeping out. The plan was simple and bold. They were going to say that word, on purpose, with no bleep covering it, again and again, until the act of saying it stopped feeling shocking at all. Inside the story, the word becomes the biggest event in the country. A popular television crime show announces that for the first time ever, one of its characters is going to say the word out loud on the air, uncensored. The whole town of South Park treats this like a holiday. People throw parties, they count down to it the way a person might count down to a fireworks show. The boys are excited, the grown-ups are excited, everyone gathers around their screens to witness the big moment, as if history is about to be made simply because a word that everyone already knows is finally going to be allowed. Then the character says it, and the world does not end. At first, it feels like a victory for everyone who wanted to hear it, but the word does not stay special for long. Once it has been said on television, the floodgates open, and suddenly everyone in town is saying it constantly. The children say it, the parents say it, the teachers say it. It pours out of every mouth in every scene dozens and dozens of times. And here is the clever part, the part that made the episode legendary. In the corner of the screen, a small counter keeps a running total of how many times the word has been used. It ticks up and up, climbing higher with every line, turning the swearing into a kind of game the audience can watch in real time. By the time the episode ends, the word has been spoken out loud 162 times. On top of that, it appears written down on signs and screens another 38 times, which brings the grand total to a clean 200. The number was not an accident. It was the goal from the very beginning. The whole episode was built to reach that mark. Behind the scenes, the way this got approved is almost funnier than the episode itself. When Parker and Stone first brought the idea to Comedy Central, they wanted to use the word only a handful of times. The channel said no. A few uses of that word felt too risky, too much like simple shock for the sake of shock. So Parker and Stone changed their approach. They went back and said they wanted to use it around 200 times instead. And strangely, the channel was fine with that. The reason makes a strange kind of sense. A few uses looked like the show was just trying to get away with swearing. 200 200 uses looked like a point was being made, like the whole thing was a joke about swearing rather than swearing itself. The sheer size of the number turned it from something rude into something that felt like commentary. The more they planned to do it, the safer it became. The episode did not stop at simply repeating the word. It wrapped the whole thing in a wild, made-up story to drive its message home. As the people of South Park keep saying the word, something terrible begins to happen. A sickness spreads through the town, and people start dropping. The boys, worried and confused, go looking for answers with the help of Chef, the wise grown-up who often guides them. What they discover is that the word carries an old and dangerous power. Long ago, in the time of knights and castles, the careless use of this very word helped bring about a great plague that swept across the land and killed huge numbers of people. By saying it so freely now, the town has woken that danger up again. There is even a group of armored knights in the story whose entire purpose is to protect the world by keeping certain words from being used too much. The show gave them a name borrowed straight from real life. At television channels, there really is a team in charge of deciding what crosses the line, and that team has a plain, official-sounding name. Parker and Stone took that name and handed it to a band of ancient knights, turning a quiet office job into a heroic battle against the forces of bad language. It was their way of laughing at the people who guard the rules, by dressing those people up as silly warriors fighting an invisible threat. Cartman, the cruel and clever boy at the center of so many of the show's darkest jokes, has his own small story tucked inside all of this. Once the word has been said so many times that it loses its sting, he becomes bored with it. The fun for him was always in saying something forbidden, and now that the word is everywhere, it does not feel forbidden anymore. So he goes hunting for new words, grosser and stranger ones, searching for something that still has the power to shock. His little quest quietly proves the episode's biggest idea. A word is only powerful because people agree that it is. Take away the agreement, say it until it is boring, and the power simply drains away. That idea sat at the very heart of what Parker and Stone were doing. The point they were making, underneath all the noise, was about how strange and uneven the rules really are. The same word that television treated as a terrible crime in a comedy was often allowed to slip through in a serious drama, where it could be called art. A funny show saying it was a scandal. A grim, dramatic show saying it was praised as brave and real. The episode pulled at that thread and asked, without ever stopping to lecture, why one was fine and the other was not, when the word coming out of every mouth was exactly the same. The episode also played a quiet trick with which words got covered up and which did not. Even in an episode where one rude word was completely free, other words were still bleeped over the top. The show pointed out, with a wink, how oddly the rules picked their targets, letting one ugly word run wild while still rushing to hide others. It was a small detail, easy to miss, but it sharpened the same point. The lines drawn around what could be said were not based on any clear, fair logic. They shifted depending on who was speaking, what kind of show it was, and what the people in charge happened to be afraid of that day. This episode also happened to arrive at a turning point in how the show was made. Around this time, Parker and Stone began using new computer tools to put the cartoon together. The change was subtle, but a careful eye could spot it. The colors looked a little softer than before, and things like fire and flames were drawn to look more real instead of looking like flat paper cutouts. So the episode that broke a swearing record also quietly marked the moment the show started to look slightly different, smoother, and more polished, even as its content stayed as rough and rude as ever. What happened after the episode aired is its own small piece of the story. Inside the world of the show, the word was treated almost like it had been used up. Having said it 200 times in a single half hour, the show mostly retired it, as if there was simply nothing left to do with it. And on the channel itself, the freedom did not stick around. Comedy Central did not turn around and start allowing that word in every episode from then on. Years passed before the channel formally let the word be used again in that open way, in a much later episode. So the record-breaking moment was less a permanent door swinging open and more a single loud statement made once, then set aside. That is the pattern worth holding onto. Parker and Stone had taken a rule, the rule about a forbidden word, and instead of quietly breaking it or sneaking around it, they broke it so completely and so many times that the breaking became the joke. They did not lose by being bound by the rules. They turned the rules into the punchline. A channel that would have blocked a few uses of a word ended up allowing 200 because the size of the thing made it feel like a lesson rather than a crime. It was the same trick they had used with the movie, where a fight over a title became a dirtier title, and a fight over a rating became a movie about people fighting over the wrong things. Take the thing standing in your way and put it on display. way. For all its noise, It Hits the Fan was a safe kind of battle. The fight was over a word, and words like that one, however rude, did not make anyone want to hurt anybody. The worst that could happen was an angry letter or a nervous advertiser. Parker and Stone could push as hard as they wanted in that direction and walk away with nothing more than a record and a good story. The risk was small, and the reward was a reputation as the show that would say the thing nobody else would say. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next time they decided to test a limit, the stakes would be completely different. They were about to put something on screen that in that moment, in the summer it first aired, caused almost no reaction at all. Hardly anyone complained. Hardly anyone even seemed to notice. Yet that quiet, harmless little moment would sit waiting for years, and one day it would come back as one of the most dangerous things the two of them had ever done. Section 3. The day they drew Muhammad and nothing happened. Religion was always one of the show's favorite places to play. From the early days, Parker and Stone treated faith the same way they treated everything else, as something to be poked, teased, and turned into jokes. Jesus was a regular character who even had his own local talk show in town. God showed up now and then. Mormons, Catholics, Jewish families, and many others all took their turns in the spotlight. Nothing about belief was treated as too holy to laugh at. That was the whole idea behind the show, the promise to treat every group the same. And when it came to religion, they kept that promise without blinking. In the summer of 2001, still in the show's 5th season, they made an episode that leaned all the way into this idea. The episode is called Super Best Friends, and it borrowed its shape from the old superhero cartoons, the kind where a group of mighty heroes team up to save the world from danger. Parker and Stone took that familiar idea and gave it a twist. Instead of caped heroes with capes and masks, their team of saviors was made up of the great religious figures of the world, all working together as one superpowered group. The story begins with a famous magician named David Blaine, a real person known for his strange and dramatic stunts. In the episode, this cartoon version of him starts a new group, a kind of cult, with himself at the top. People flock to join. They give up their old lives and follow him without question, drawn in by his tricks, which they mistake for real miracles. The name of his group was a clear joke aimed at a real religion called Scientology, a faith with many famous followers and a reputation for being fiercely protective of itself. Parker and Stone would return to that particular target in a much larger way some years later, but here it was simply one more thread in the story. Stan, one of the 4 main boys, gets pulled into the group. He is lonely and looking for a place to belong, and the group seems to offer him that. For a while he goes along with it. Then the leader reveals a dark plan. He intends to have all of his followers take their own lives together in a single act, a mass ending meant to prove their devotion. Stan realizes how wrong this is and wants out, but the group is too large and too far gone to simply talk down. He needs help that is bigger than anything an ordinary person can give. So he turns to a higher power, and the show answers in its own playful way. Jesus arrives, and he is not alone. He brings with him the rest of the team, the super best friends. Standing together are figures from many of the world's faiths. There is Jesus from Christianity, Moses from the Jewish tradition, Buddha, the Hindu figure Krishna, the founder of the Mormon faith Joseph Smith, the ancient Chinese teacher Lao Tzu, and the founder of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad. A few silly or made-up members rounded out the group. Each one had a special power. Buddha could make himself unseen. Moses appeared as a glowing presence, and Muhammad, standing right there among the others, could control fire, shooting flames as his gift. Muhammad appeared on screen plainly and fully, drawn and animated just like every other member of the team. He spoke. He used his power. He was treated as one hero among many, no more hidden and no more special than Jesus or Buddha standing beside him. To Parker and Stone, this was nothing unusual. They were doing exactly what they always did, lining up the great figures of religion and tossing them into a goofy adventure together, each one given the same weight and the same gentle mockery as the next. For many Muslims, though, putting the Prophet Muhammad into a picture at all is a serious matter. There is a deeply held belief, shared across much of the Islamic faith, that the Prophet should never be drawn or shown in any image. The reason runs deep. The faith warns strongly against anything that might lead people to worship a person instead of God, and showing the Prophet's face is seen by many as a step toward that mistake. So for a great number of believers, any drawing of Muhammad, even a respectful one, crosses a line that should never be crossed. A cartoon version of him, dropped into a comedy full of jokes, would strike many as far worse. And yet, when this episode first aired in the summer of 2001, almost nothing happened. There was no wave of anger. There were no protests outside the studio. There were no demands that the episode be pulled. The moment passed so quietly that most people watching probably did not not even register it as something risky. The show had placed the Prophet Muhammad on screen in a joke, and the world barely reacted. For Parker and Stone, it was just another episode, one of many they were churning out that year, and it slipped into the long list of their work without any special mark on it. The Quiet was a product of its time. The episode arrived in a particular moment, only a couple of months before the September attacks of 2001 in the United States, after which the wider world's feelings around these images would grow far more tense and far more raw. In that earlier summer, the question of drawing Muhammad simply was not a loud or dangerous subject in American life. The fierce battles over such images had not yet erupted. So a small cartoon doing something that would later feel like touching a live wire instead touched nothing at all. The wire was not yet live. There is something almost gentle about the episode when looked at this way. In Super Best Friends, the founder of Islam stands shoulder to shoulder with the central figures of every other major faith, all of them on equal footing, all of them treated as part of the same team, all of them teased in the same friendly way. No single one of them was protected. No single one of them was singled out for fear. The show's promise that everyone was fair game held perfectly in that moment, more perfectly than it ever would again. Every great religious figure got the same treatment, and the result was a strange kind of fairness, where Muhammad was neither feared nor favored, just included. That balance did not last. Over the next several years, the world changed around the episode, while the episode itself stayed exactly the same. In the middle of the decade, a newspaper in a small European country printed a set of drawings of the Prophet Muhammad. The reaction spread across the globe. There were furious protests in many countries, and some of them turned violent. The simple act of drawing the Prophet had become, almost overnight, one of the most charged and dangerous things a person could do in the public eye. People had been hurt over such images. The subject had teeth now, and everyone in the business of making cartoons could feel it. Parker and Stone returned to the theme more than once in the years that followed, and each new attempt drew more heat than the last. The pressure built and built. Then, around the year 2010, after the show tried once again to deal with the image of Muhammad, came direct threats against the two creators, warnings that suggested they could be killed for what they had done. The mood had shifted as far as it could shift. What had been a harmless cartoon gag in 2001 had become, by 2010, a matter that involved real fear for real lives. In the wake of all of that, the old episode was quietly taken away. Comedy Central stopped showing Super Best Friends in its reruns. The show's own official website, which had long let fans watch episodes freely, removed it. As time went on and the show moved from one streaming home to another, this episode kept getting left behind, locked out of the places where every other episode lived. People who wanted to see it could no longer simply turn it on. The only place it survived was on the physical discs of the 5th season, sitting on shelves, a leftover from a time before the subject became too hot to handle. Nothing about the episode had changed in those years. Not a single frame was different. Not one line of dialogue had been rewritten. The very same cartoon that had aired without a ripple in 2001 was now considered too dangerous to show. The only thing that had shifted was the world outside it, and the level of fear that surrounded one particular image. The content stayed frozen in place. The danger grew up around it. This is the cleanest example in the whole long history of the show of what censorship really comes down to. For a long time, people imagine that things get banned because they are offensive, as if offense alone is the thing that pulls a show off the air. Super Best Friends quietly proved otherwise. The episode was exactly as offensive to that belief in 2001 as it was in 2010. The drawing of the Prophet was the same drawing. The joke was the same joke. What separated the calm of one year from the alarm of another was not offense at all. It was fear. When there was no fear, the image could stand among the others, equal and untouched. Once fear entered the picture, that one figure had to be hidden away, while Jesus and Buddha and all the rest stayed right where they had always been. That single difference would come to shape the rest of the show's life. The promise to treat everyone the same had held without exception for years. Now, a quiet crack had appeared in it. From this point forward, there would be one figure the show could no longer touch the way it touched all the others. Not because Parker and Stone had changed their minds about fairness, but because the cost of being fair had risen too high for anyone to pay. The everyone is fair game rule had met the one exception it could not push past, and the exception had been forced on it from the outside. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Before all of that arrived, though, there was still the matter of the joke buried inside Super Best Friends, the one aimed at that protective Hollywood religion. Parker and Stone had only tapped at it lightly here, with a cartoon magician and his strange little cult. A few years down the road, they would aim at the same target with their full strength, building an entire episode episode around it. That second swing would not pass quietly the way this one did. It would pull a real and famous movie star into a fury. It would set off threats of lawsuits, and it would end with one of the show's most beloved voices walking out the door for good. Section 4. A movie star, a closet, and a friend who walked away. By late 2005, the show had spent years aiming at powerful people and walking away unharmed. Parker and Stone had built a habit of choosing targets that scared other writers off, and they took a certain pride in going after the ones nobody else would touch. There was one target in particular that most of Hollywood treated as untouchable. It was a religion called Scientology, a faith started decades earlier by a science fiction writer, with a long roster of famous and wealthy members. The reason people stayed away from it was simple. The group had a reputation for taking its critics to court. Say the wrong thing and you might find yourself buried in lawsuits. That fear kept comedians, reporters, and television shows quiet for years. Parker and Stone saw that fear and decided to walk straight into it. They had already given the religion a light tap in an earlier episode, the one with the cartoon magician and his strange little cult. This time, they wanted to build a whole episode around it and aim with their full strength. The episode is called Trapped in the Closet, and it first aired in November of 2005. One thing worked in their favor. Their show was made very fast, much faster than most television. So by the time anyone powerful even knew what was coming, the episode was already finished and on the air. There was no slow build that gave anyone a chance to stop it. The story starts small. Stan, feeling low, takes a personality test offered by members of the religion. They score it and tell him something shocking. According to them, his results are off the charts, and he must be the chosen one they have been waiting for. They declare that Stan is the founder of their faith, returned to life in a new body. The idea behind this is the belief that a person who has died can come back, born again as someone new, and the group is convinced that the spirit of their long-dead founder now lives inside this ordinary boy. Word spreads, and soon crowds of believers gather outside Stan's house, treating him like a living miracle. In the middle of all this, the episode does something bold. It stops to explain in plain terms what members of this religion are said to actually believe about how the world began. The story it lays out is a strange one, full of ancient space rulers and souls scattered across the planet long ago. While this tale plays out on screen, a small note appears for the audience to read, telling them in clear words that this is genuinely what followers of the faith believe. There was no winking, no hiding behind made-up nonsense. The show wanted everyone watching to understand that it was describing real teachings, not invented ones. Then comes the part that drew the most heat. Tom Cruise, a real and enormously famous movie star and a well-known member of the religion, arrives at Stan's house. He is desperate for the boy's approval, since the boy is supposed to be the reborn founder. When Stan fails to be impressed, telling Cruise that he does not think he is as great an actor as some others, Cruise is crushed. He retreats into Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. From there, the episode turns into a long-running joke, with Stan repeatedly calling out that Tom Cruise will not come out of the closet, and others begging him to come out, while the movie star stays stubbornly hidden inside. The joke worked on two levels at once. On the surface, it is just a silly image of a grown man hiding in a child's closet and refusing to leave. Underneath, the phrase about coming out of the closet has another meaning. To come out of the closet means to finally tell the world that you are gay. There had long been tabloid rumors and gossip about Cruise's private life, rumors he had firmly denied, and the episode leaned into that gossip without ever saying anything outright. It simply trapped him in a closet and let the double meaning do the work. Two other famous men eventually join him in there, and one of them, a singer, delivers all of his lines by singing them, a nod to one of that singer's own famous works. The show even dared the religion to fight back. At the very end, Stan stands up to the angry crowd of believers and tells them to go ahead and sue him if they want. Parker and Stone carried that dare right into the closing credits. As the names rolled at the end of the episode, every single person involved was listed under a fake name, with everyone called either John Smith or Jane Smith. It was a joke and a shield at the same time, a way of pretending to hide their real names in case the lawsuits came pouring in. The whole episode was practically a hand waved in front of a group famous for fighting back, an invitation to come and try. That invitation was, in a way, the point. Parker and Stone later admitted that the episode was partly about the lawsuits themselves. They were curious about a group known for being quick to take people to court, and they wanted to poke at it and see exactly where the line was and what a person could get away with. They picked the fight on purpose, just to find out what would happen. Behind closed doors, the religion did consider striking back. Leaders talked about responding and even weighed taking the creators to court. In the end, they chose not to, because their own people judged that the legal case was weak and unlikely to win. So the lawsuits never came. The dare went unanswered, at least in a courtroom. The real cost landed somewhere somewhere nobody expected. For years, one of the most beloved voices on the show belonged to a character named Chef, the warm, wise school cook who often gave the boys honest advice in the middle of their wild adventures. Chef was voiced by a famous singer named Isaac Hayes, a legend in the music world, and his deep, friendly voice was a huge part of why the character was so loved. Hayes was also, in his real life, a member of the very religion the show had just spent a whole episode mocking. A few months after the episode aired, in early 2006, a statement went out in Isaac Hayes' name. It said he was leaving the show. The statement explained that he could no longer support a program that treated people's deeply held beliefs with such disrespect. On its face, it looked like a man of faith finally drawing a line. Matt Stone fired back sharply. He pointed out that Hayes had never once complained when the show made fun of Christians or any other group over all the years he had worked there. The trouble only started, Stone said, the moment the jokes turned towards Scientology specifically. Hayes had happily taken his paychecks while every other faith got mocked, and only now, when his own was the target, did the line suddenly appear. The fuller truth came out slowly, and it was sadder than a simple argument over beliefs. Around the time the statement was released, Isaac Hayes had suffered a stroke, a serious medical event that left him unable to speak clearly or make decisions on his own. He was in no shape to write or approve any public statement. Years later, after Hayes had passed away, his own son spoke up to set the record straight. He said plainly that his father did not quit the show. Scientology quit it for him. According to The Sun, people connected to the religion had issued the statement in Hayes' name, while the man himself was too ill to know or agree to what was being said on his behalf. Matt Stone's own memory of those final days matched that picture. He recalled a conversation with Hayes shortly after the episode aired, and he said it became clear that someone had sent Hayes to ask them to pull the episode. By then, the episode had already been broadcast, so there was nothing to pull. Stone also said they chose not to tell Hayes certain things, on purpose, so that none of it could be blamed on him later. They wanted to protect their friend from being held responsible for a fight he had been pushed into. A man who had spent years as part of their show was caught in the middle, used as a messenger, and then signed away from the work he loved without truly being able to speak for himself. Parker and Stone responded to losing him in their own unmistakable style. When the next season began in early 2006, they opened it with an episode built entirely around Chef's return and farewell. In the story, Chef comes back to town, but he has been changed. He has fallen under the control of a sinister club, a clear stand-in for the religion that had taken Hayes away from them. His mind has been twisted, and the warm, wise character the audience knew is mostly gone. By the end of the episode, the show kills the character off. To put his voice into this final appearance, they pieced together lines from old recordings Hayes had made over the years, stitching them into new sentences. It was a strange, bitter goodbye, equal parts tribute and protest, a way of mourning the man while attacking the thing they believed had stolen him. The censorship part of the story arrived a little later, and it came from a different direction entirely. In March of 2006, the channel planned to show Trapped in the Closet again as a rerun. Then suddenly it was gone from the schedule, swapped out at the last minute for an old episode from years earlier. The replacement happened quietly and without much explanation. Soon, reports began to spread about why. Word was that Tom Cruise himself had pushed for the rerun to be canceled, leaning on the giant company that owned the channel. The setup made that pressure very real. The channel was owned by a huge company, and that same company also owned the famous movie studio where Tom Cruise had spent years as one of its most valuable and bankable stars. He brought in enormous amounts of money for them. A person with that kind of value to a company holds a quiet sort of power over it. A nudge from someone that important does not need to be loud to be felt. Cruise's representatives denied that he had asked for the episode to be pulled. The channel did not give a clear public reason, but the timing and the reports pointed in one obvious direction, and most people drew the same conclusion. Parker and Stone refused to take it quietly. They put out a statement through their lawyer, written in the same mocking spirit as the episode itself. In it, they joked that Scientology might have won this one battle, but that the million-year war for the planet had only just begun. They signed off pretending to be loyal servants of the ancient space ruler from the religion's creation story, treating the whole thing as one move in a grand cosmic struggle. It was defiance dressed up as comedy, their way of refusing to look beaten even as one of their episodes vanished from the air. What makes this whole chapter important is that it shows a brand new kind of silencing. Up to this point, the show had been pushed around by a ratings group fussing over titles and words. Now it had run into something quieter and, in some ways, harder to fight. There was no government rule broken here, no law about decency, no religious belief about images. There was simply money and influence. A single powerful person working through the company company that signed the show's checks could make an episode disappear from the schedule without ever filing a lawsuit or issuing a public order. The pressure came from inside the same house the show lived in. That made it a different beast altogether. The price had also become personal in a way it never had before. A fight over a movie rating cost nobody anything but time and pride. This fight had cost them a member of their own family, a man whose voice had warmed the show for years, taken from them while he was too sick to choose for himself. The promise to make fun of everyone equally was turning out to carry a real and rising bill. Each new battle demanded more than the last. Years earlier, the show had jabbed at this same religion in passing and walked away without a scratch. This time, going at it with everything they had. They lost a friend, lost an episode from the air, and learned that some targets could reach back and take something that truly mattered. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Barely a few weeks after the storm over the Scientology episode began to settle, another faith would come knocking, upset over something very different. This time, it would not be a movie star working the phones. It would be a religious group offended by a bleeding statue, and a single, quiet phone call to a powerful man inside that same enormous company. And that call would get results faster than anyone expected. Section 5. The bleeding statue and the angry phone call. The storm over the Scientology episode had barely begun to settle when another one rolled in. The two fights happened so close together that they almost overlapped. Within the same stretch of weeks in late 2005, while one famous movie star was quietly leaning on the company behind the show, a completely different group was getting ready to come at it from another side. This time, the anger came from one of the largest and oldest faiths in the world, and the spark was an episode about a bleeding statue. Catholics had been targets of the show before. By 2005, it was nothing new for Parker and Stone to aim jokes at the Catholic Church, at the Pope, at priests, and at the rituals and symbols of the faith. They treated it the way they treated every belief, as fair territory for comedy. But this particular episode touched something many Catholics hold especially dear. It centered on the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, who in the Catholic faith is honored above almost anyone, a figure of deep love and reverence. To mock her and to do it in a crude way was always going to land harder than mocking almost anything else. The episode is called Bloody Mary, and it carries two stories at once. The first follows Randy, Stan's father, who drives home after drinking and gets pulled over. He loses his license and is ordered to join a support group, the kind where people who drink too much gather to help one another stop. At these meetings, Randy is told that his drinking is a disease, something he is powerless over and will carry for the rest of his life. He takes this idea and runs with it, growing convinced that he is sick with something deadly and beyond his control. Soon he believes the only thing that can save him is a miracle. Stan, watching his father spiral, tries to argue the opposite, that his dad does have power over himself and can simply choose to drink less. That smaller story carried the show's real opinion about how people talk about drinking, but the part that set the world on fire was the second story. In a nearby town, a statue of the Virgin Mary begins to bleed. The show staged this in a deliberately crude and shocking way, with the statue appearing to bleed from its rear end and spraying those who came close. Word spreads that this is a holy sign, a true miracle, and people flood in from everywhere to witness it. Randy, desperate for his cure, comes to be touched by the blood, certain it will heal him. The episode builds toward a visit from the Pope himself, who travels to examine the statue and decide whether it is truly a miracle. When he gets close, the blood sprays onto him too. After looking it over, he gives his ruling. He decides the statue is simply going through the ordinary monthly bleeding that women's bodies naturally have, and so there is nothing holy about it at all. The timing made everything worse. The episode first aired on the 7th of December in 2005, which happened to fall on the eve of a special Catholic holy day, one set aside to honor the Virgin Mary, held each year in early December. So a crude joke about Mary bleeding arrived the night before one of the most important days devoted to her. To many Catholics, that felt less like an accident and more like an insult aimed straight at the heart of their faith, dropped at the worst possible moment. The response came quickly and it came organized. A Catholic watchdog group led by a vocal man named Bill Donahue condemned the episode in strong terms. They called it vile and demanded action. Their list of demands was specific. They wanted an apology to Catholics. They wanted the episode retired for good, never shown again. And they wanted a promise that it would never be released on disc for people to buy and keep. This was not a vague complaint shouted into the air. It was a clear set of asks backed by a group that knew how to apply pressure. Then they did something clever, something that showed they understood how power really works inside big companies. Rather than only shouting at the channel from the outside, they reached inside it. The channel was owned by a giant company, and that company was run, in part, by a small group of important people people who help guide its biggest decisions. Sitting on that group was a man who happened to be a practicing Catholic. The watchdog group singled him out by name and called on him directly to condemn the episode and to use his position to do something about it. They turned one of the company's own leaders into a pressure point, asking a believer on the inside to act on behalf of his faith. The move worked. The Catholic board member released a statement of his own, calling the episode an appalling and disgusting portrayal of the Virgin Mary and pledging that the matter would be looked into. Now the pressure was no longer just coming from angry letters and outside groups. It was coming from within the company's own leadership, from a man who helped steer the whole operation. That changed the weight of the thing entirely. What followed was quiet and fast. Late in December of 2005, an executive at the channel picked up the phone and called the Catholic group. He told them, plainly, that there were no plans to rerun the Bloody Mary episode. A few days later, the news reported what had happened. The channel had pulled the scheduled rerun. When the channel went back and replayed the rest of that season's episodes around the same time, Bloody Mary was simply missing from the lineup, skipped over as if it had never existed. Bill Donahue, who had led the charge, praised the channel for finally making the right choice. The contrast with the Scientology fight is worth sitting with. That earlier battle had been loud and dramatic, full of lawsuit threats, a famous movie star, a lost cast member, and a defiant public statement. This one was almost silent by comparison. There was no courtroom drama and no celebrity feud. There was a well-organized group, a single offended insider with a seat at the top table, and a quiet phone call. And the quiet approach got results just as surely as the loud one had. An episode vanished from the schedule because the right person inside the company had been reached and persuaded. There is a strange wrinkle in all of it. The loud campaign against the episode, all the condemnation and the calls to ban it, actually drove far more people to watch. When the episode aired and the outrage spread, curiosity spread with it. Many who might never have tuned in went looking for the thing everyone was angry about. By some measures, the episode drew several times the audience a normal episode would. The effort to bury it had the side effect of shining a bright light on it first. The same pattern Parker and Stone had seen again and again. Trying to silence the show often handed it a bigger crowd. It also turned out, as it had with the Scientology episode, that the win was only temporary. The ban did not hold forever. The following summer, in August of 2006, Bloody Mary quietly returned to the air after all. The pressure had worked in the moment, keeping it off screens during the period of greatest anger, but the episode itself was never truly erased. It slipped back into the rotation once the heat had cooled, joining the long list of episodes the show had managed to win back over time. The retreat had been real, but it had a shelf life. What this whole chapter adds to the larger story is a fresh lesson about how the show could be silenced. By now, a clear pattern was forming, and each new fight filled in another piece of it. A ratings group could push the show around by fussing over words and titles. A powerful movie star could make an episode disappear by leaning on the company that owned it. And now a religious group had shown that it could do the same, not by being the loudest voice in the room, but by finding the one offended believer who sat in a seat of power and persuading him to act. The common thread running through all of it had little to do with how offensive any single episode truly was. It had everything to do with who could reach the people holding the controls. There is one more piece to this, and it points straight at the heart of everything the show would face next. The very group that won this fight, the watchdogs who got the Mary episode pulled, would later speak up about something they had noticed. They pointed out, with open anger, that the channel had moved quickly to yank an episode that offended Catholics, while at the same time refusing, out of plain fear, to show even a simple picture of the founder of Islam. They argued that the network was willing to bend for some faiths and not for others, and that the difference came down to which group the channel was more afraid of. Even the people who had just bullied the show into submission could see the uneven rules at work. They had won their fight, and in winning it, they had stumbled onto the very thing that would define the show's hardest battles to come. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because the channel had now shown, twice in a matter of weeks, that it would bend. A quiet phone call from an offended insider could make an episode go away. A nudge from a powerful star could do the same. The people who ran the show had learned that the company above them had soft spots, places where the right pressure in the right spot would make it fold. That knowledge would sit in the background as a much larger storm gathered. This one far across the ocean, building over a handful of drawings of a single religious figure. And when Parker and Stone tried to drag that overseas fight onto their own little cartoon, the company above them would finally do something it had never done before. It would reach into the show itself, mid-scene, and black out the screen with its own hands. Section 6. The Cartoon cartoon they were not allowed to air. By the spring of 2006, the channel had shown its soft spots twice in a matter of months. A movie star had made one episode vanish from a rerun slot. A religious group, working through an insider, had made another one disappear. The people who ran the show now knew that the company above them would bend under the right kind of pressure. What came next would test that company in a way it had never been tested before. And the pressure this time was not a phone call or a lawsuit threat. It was fear, raw and global. The trouble started far from Colorado, in a small country in Europe called Denmark. In the autumn of 2005, a newspaper there printed a set of drawings of the Prophet Muhammad. As described earlier, the simple act of drawing the founder of Islam is something many Muslims hold to be deeply forbidden. When those drawings spread, the reaction grew into something enormous. By early 2006, there were furious protests across many countries. Some of them turned violent. Buildings were attacked. People were hurt. The whole world watched as anger over a handful of cartoons boiled over into real danger. Drawing Muhammad had become, almost overnight, one of the most perilous things a person could do in public. Parker and Stone were drawn to this fight like moths to a flame. The subject was exactly the kind of thing that fascinated them. A clash between the freedom to make fun of anything and the threat of being hurt for doing it. There was also a second thing pulling at them. They had never been fond of another grown-up cartoon, a rival show called Family Guy. They thought it leaned too heavily on a certain kind of lazy joke, the kind where the story suddenly stops so the show can cut away to something random and unrelated, a quick gag that has nothing to do with anything. They wanted to take a swing at that show too, so they built an episode that would do both at once, mocking the rival cartoon while diving headfirst into the most dangerous subject in the world. They called it Cartoon Wars, and it came in 2 parts, airing one week after the other in April of 2006. There was a sharp memory hanging over the whole thing. Years earlier, the show had drawn Muhammad freely, in the episode where the great religious figures teamed up. And at the time, nobody had blinked. Now, the very same act had become a thing people might kill over. Parker and Stone remembered when it had been easy, and they were angry that it no longer was. The story they built begins with panic. Word reaches the town that the rival cartoon, Family Guy, is going to air an episode that shows Muhammad as a character. The reaction is terror. Everyone is convinced that simply having such an image on television will bring a violent attack down on all of them. In one of the episode's strangest and funniest images, the townspeople decide the safest thing to do is to bury their heads in the sand, literally digging holes and sticking their heads down into them, so that they cannot be blamed or targeted. It was a cartoon picture of cowardice, of people so afraid that they would rather hide from a problem than face it. Cartman seizes the moment. He decides he wants the rival cartoon pulled off the air entirely, and he claims he is doing it to protect Muslims from being offended. He sets off across the country to make it happen. Kyle, who actually likes the rival show, does not believe Cartman for a second. He suspects that Cartman simply hates the cartoon and is using the fear of violence as an excuse to get it canceled. The two of them race across the land, one trying to silence the show and the other trying to save it, and their chase becomes the spine of the story. Tucked inside the episode is a speech that carries its real message. Butter's father, a normally timid man, stands up and says something plain and serious. He points out that Americans have enjoyed the freedom to speak their minds for so long that they have forgotten it is a thing worth protecting. They have never truly had to fight for it or defend it, he says, and because of that, they take it for granted. Giving in to the fear over one image, he warns, could be the first step down a long and dangerous slope. The whole town, with their heads in the sand, stands as the picture of what he is warning against. The deepest point of the episode comes through Kyle. Near the end, he stands before the head of the rival network and makes a simple, hard argument. He says that either everything can be made fun of or nothing can. There is no fair way to draw a line that protects one thing out of fear while leaving everything else open to mockery. The moment you carve out a single exception because someone might hurt you, he argues, you have handed enormous power to anyone willing to make a threat. You have taught the world that threatening violence works. Kyle tells the network boss to do the right thing and air the image, not because the image matters, but because backing down would matter far more. The boss, moved by this, agrees to let it run uncensored, choosing courage over fear. And here is where the real world reached up and grabbed the show by the throat. Inside the episode, the moment finally arrives for Muhammad to appear on screen. The story has built all the way to this point. The whole thing has been an argument for showing him, and the network boss has just bravely agreed to do it. Then, at the exact instant the image should appear, the screen goes black. In place of Muhammad, a plain black card appears with a message on it. The message tells the audience that Comedy Central had refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on its network. That black card was not a joke written by Parker and Stone. It was real. The channel itself had stepped in and blocked the image. The company that owns owned the show had reached into the episode at the most important moment and blacked out the screen with its own hands. Nothing like this had happened before. The show had been pushed around in many ways, but the network had never simply seized control of a scene and erased it mid-story. The very episode that argued so passionately against giving in to fear was in real life censored by a network giving in to exactly that fear, in front of everyone watching. The story behind the black card had been building for weeks. Sometime before the episode aired, the channel had told Parker and Stone plainly that they would not be allowed to show Muhammad. The reason given was the safety of the public. With protests and violence spreading around the world over images of the prophet, the company did not want to risk becoming a target. Parker and Stone were furious. To them, this was hypocrisy of the clearest kind. They had spent years being allowed to mock every faith in the harshest ways imaginable, and now, suddenly, this one image was off limits. The image they had planned to show was not even cruel. In the rival cartoon's version, Muhammad was simply going to hand a character a helmet, a gentle, harmless little moment with no insult in it at all, and still, it was forbidden. So Parker and Stone did what they always did. They took the thing being done to them and put it right into the show. Rather than quietly accept the censorship and hide it, they wrote the network's refusal into the story itself so that the audience would see the censorship happening live. The black card became part of the episode's argument. The empty space where Muhammad should have been said more than any drawing of him ever could. It showed in real time the fear winning, the line being drawn, the thing the whole episode had warned against coming true. Then they made their point even sharper. Right after the black card that refused to show a gentle picture of Muhammad, the episode cut to a scene that was deeply crude and offensive to Christians. It showed Jesus along with the President of the United States and the American flag all being defecated on. The channel allowed that to air without a problem. And it aired during the most sacred week of the Christian calendar, the week leading up to Easter, the holiest stretch of the year for Christians. The contrast was impossible to miss. The network would broadcast Jesus and the nation's own leader and its flag being soiled on the holiest week for Christians, but would not show a single peaceful image of the founder of Islam. The two scenes, placed back to back, asked a silent question that needed no words. The only thing that separated the allowed from the forbidden was which group might respond with violence. This is the moment the whole pattern of the show's censorship comes into its sharpest focus. Until now, the show had been silenced in 3 different ways. A ratings group had fussed over titles and words. A movie star had quietly pulled strings inside the company. A religious group had reached an insider with power. Now came a 4th way, and it was the most revealing of all. The network itself, the very company that made and aired the show, had stepped in and censored its own program out of fear. And the genius of Parker and Stone was that they turned that censorship into the episode's entire subject. Forbidden from showing the image, they showed the censorship instead, displaying the black box where the image should have been and letting the audience watch the silencing as it happened. The lesson sitting underneath all of it could not be clearer. The one rule the show could never break had nothing to do with how offensive something was. The network proved that in the same breath by airing Jesus being soiled in the crudest possible way while blocking a harmless drawing. The channel had no problem with offense. It had a problem with danger. The single forbidden thing was the one image that might get someone hurt. Offense was free. Fear was the only true censor. Years earlier, the same image had aired on the same show without a ripple, back when the world was calm. Now, the same company blacked it out because the world had grown teeth. And the offended Catholic group from just months before had already spotted this exact uneven rule, pointing out that the channel would pull an episode mocking their faith, yet refuse out of fear to show even a picture of Muhammad. Everyone could see the line now. The show had simply forced the network to draw it in public. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What makes the story stranger still is how the rules could swing in the opposite direction just as wildly. The channel had refused out of fear to show one quiet image. Yet within the next year, Parker and Stone would prove how lopsided the whole thing really was by doing something that seemed far more shocking on its face. They would take the single most hateful and forbidden word in the entire language, a word soaked in centuries of cruelty, and they would say it out loud, uncensored, dozens of times in a single episode. By every surface measure, it should have caused an explosion far bigger than a gentle drawing ever could. Instead, almost no one would object at all. Section 7. the worst word on television, said 42 times less than a year after the network reached into an episode and blacked out a single gentle image out of fear, Parker and Stone swung all the way to the other end of the scale. Having been told that one quiet drawing was too dangerous to show, they turned around and aimed at the most hateful word in the entire language, a word so heavy with cruelty that most of television treated it as untouchable. They did not hint at it or bleep around it. They said it out loud, uncensored, again and again, in an episode that opened their 11th season in early 2007. And the strangest part of the whole story is what happened afterward, which was almost nothing at all. The idea did not come out of nowhere. A few months earlier, in late 2006, a well-known comedian had a meltdown on stage at a comedy club in Los Angeles. While he was performing, some people in the audience began shouting insults at him, the kind of heckling that can throw a comedian off. Instead of brushing it off, he snapped. He turned on the black members of the crowd and screamed that terrible racial slur at them, over and over in a furious rage. The whole ugly scene was caught on video and spread across the country. People were horrified. In the days that followed, the comedian tried to repair the damage by reaching out to famous civil rights leaders, black ministers who had long spoken up for the rights of black Americans, and apologizing to them in public, as if their forgiveness could wash the whole thing clean. Parker and Stone had wanted to make an episode about this exact word for a long time, well before any of this happened. The word fascinated them, not as a thing to throw around carelessly, but as the most powerful and most forbidden word in the language. And they wanted to dig into why it held so much force. When the comedian's meltdown filled the news, it gave them the doorway they had been waiting for. The very first idea they had, and for a while the only idea, was a single scene, and it became the opening of the episode. Trey Parker later said it was one of his favorite things the show ever did. The scene takes place on a famous television game show, the kind where players try to solve a hidden word puzzle by guessing letters one at a time. Randy, Stan's father, is a contestant, and he has played his way all the way to the final puzzle, with his whole family watching and the whole town tuned in at home. The category for his puzzle is people who annoy you. Most of the letters are already filled in, and only one letter is missing. The real answer was a fairly innocent word, a word for people who nag and pester and complain at you without stopping. But the missing letter sat in a spot where the word could be misread, and the intended answer was only one letter away from the terrible slur. Randy stares at the board, thinks he has it, and on live national television he blurts out the slur instead of the harmless word. The mistake destroys his life almost instantly. Across the country, in front of millions, he has said the worst word a person can say. Overnight, he becomes known everywhere as the man who said that word on the game show. People treat him like poison. He gets confronted on the street. Stores refuse to serve him. His name is gone, replaced entirely by his shameful new label. Throughout all of this, the word itself keeps appearing, spoken openly and uncensored by Randy and by many other characters. A total of 42 separate times across the episode, with no bleep and no black box covering any of it. Two very different stories run side by side here, and the gap between them is the whole point. Randy's story is the shallow one. His problem is mostly about embarrassment. He wants people to stop calling him the name. He wants his good reputation back. He wants the whole mess to go away so he can feel comfortable again. His suffering is real to him, but it stays on the surface. The wounded pride of a man who said something stupid and now wishes everyone would forget it. The deeper story belongs to Stan and his classmate Token, one of the few black children in town. Stan does not understand why everyone is so upset. He keeps telling Token that it is no big deal, that his dad is not a hateful person, that it was just a slip of the tongue and everyone should move on. Token, hurt and frustrated, tries again and again to explain that Stan cannot possibly grasp how it feels to have that word aimed at you, to carry the weight of everything behind it. The harder Stan insists that he gets it, the more it becomes clear that he does not get it at all. The center of the whole episode is that gap, the difference between thinking you understand someone else's pain and actually understanding it. Randy, meanwhile, tries to fix his ruined name by copying what the real comedian had done. He goes to apologize to a famous civil rights leader, hoping a public apology will set everything right. The cartoon version of that leader is not exactly noble about it. He makes Randy kiss his behind as the price of forgiveness, and a photo of the humiliating moment is published in the newspapers. Stan sees this and thinks the problem is solved now since the important man has accepted the apology. Token sets him straight with a sharp line, telling Stan that this one leader does not speak for all black people, and that no single man can hand out forgiveness on behalf of an entire group. That idea came straight from real life. One of the show's writers, watching the real comedian seek forgiveness from one famous leader as though that fixed everything, had reacted the same way, and his frustration became Token's words. The episode does not end with a neat lesson where everyone learns to get along. It ends with something quieter and more honest. Stan finally stops insisting that he understands. He goes to Token and admits the truth, that he can never really know how the word feels to him, that he has no way to share that pain because it was never his to carry. And that admission, the simple honesty of giving up the pretense, is what finally reaches Token. The message buried in all the crude jokes turned out to be a gentle and serious one. Do not pretend to understand a hurt that is not yours. Sometimes the most respectful thing a person can do is admit that they cannot fully understand at all. There is a second story woven through the episode too, running alongside the main one. Cartman spends his time tormenting a man who came to the school to teach the children about being kind and sensitive to others. A man who happened to be very short, a little person. Cartman cannot stop mocking him for his size, no matter how much it hurts the man, and it all builds toward a physical fight between them. That smaller story echoes the bigger one. It is about words that wound, about a person refusing to see another's pain, and about the strange cruelty that comes so easily to people who have never had to feel what their targets feel. Now comes the part that matters most for understanding how censorship really worked on this show. By every surface measure, this episode should have caused an enormous explosion. It put the single most hateful word in the language on national television, uncensored, 42 times. It is hard to imagine anything more likely to spark outrage, and yet the outrage never came. The episode drew very little anger and very little attention. Instead, something surprising happened. A major, long-respected organization that works for the rights of Black Americans actually praised the episode. They said it was a good example of teaching the public about the power of hateful words and the real harm those words can do. They saw what the show was trying to do, and they approved of it. The only notable complaints came from an odd direction. A watchdog group that normally spends its time attacking television for being offensive, through its founder, criticized the episode. But the complaint was not that the show had gone too far. The complaint was that there had not been enough protest against it. The man was upset that the world had let the episode pass so quietly, that nobody seemed bothered by the most hateful word in the language being broadcast so many times. His objection, in a strange way, only proved the point. The episode had said the unsayable, and the country had mostly shrugged. Millions of people watched it. The network allowed every single use of the word to air uncensored, with no bleep and no black box anywhere in sight. Set this episode next to the one from the year before, and the whole truth about the show's limits snaps into focus. Less than a year earlier, the very same network had refused, out of pure fear, to show one quiet and harmless drawing. The image they blocked was gentle. It insulted no one. It was simply a picture. Now that same network aired the most directly hurtful word in the language, a word that carries centuries of real cruelty against real people, dozens of times without flinching. One was forbidden, the other was free, and the difference between them had nothing to do with how offensive or how hurtful each one was. By any honest measure, the slur is far more wounding to far more people than a peaceful drawing of a religious figure. It targets living human beings directly. It drags a long and painful history behind it. If the rules of what could be shown were truly about avoiding offense or avoiding harm, the word would have been the thing that was blocked, and the gentle image would have been the thing that sailed through. The show proved that the rules ran the other way around. The deciding factor was never offense at all. It was danger, and the fear of who might strike back. The show could say the most painful word in the language because no one was going to respond to it with violence. There would be angry feelings, hurt feelings, hard conversations, but no threat to anyone's life. So the network let it run. The show could not show one drawing because in that moment in the world, someone somewhere might answer it with real harm. So the network blocked it. The choice was made out of fear for safety, not out of concern for feelings. Placed side by side, these two episodes from neighboring years strip away every other excuse and leave only that single, simple truth standing in the open. It helps that the show handled the word with real care and real purpose, which is partly why it earned praise instead of fury. They did not toss the slur around for cheap shock. They built an entire thoughtful story around it, about pain and understanding, and the limits of one person's ability to feel another's wounds. The seriousness of the handling shaped how it was received, but for the larger story of what the show was allowed and not allowed to do, the lesson holds firm no matter how thoughtfully the word was used. The line that could not be crossed was never drawn around offense. It was drawn around fear. By this point, Parker and Stone had tested the boundary from nearly every angle. They had broken word rules and watched the world barely blink. They had been blocked from one image and waved through on everything else. No matter how crude or how how cruel. They had learned beyond any doubt that the only true limit they faced was the limit of fear, the single subject the network would not touch because of what might happen if it did. Most people in their position would have left that one subject alone, having seen so clearly how dangerous it had become. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Parker and Stone chose to walk straight back into it. A few years later, they would aim at that one forbidden thing once more, head on, building two connected episodes designed to drag the whole hypocrisy out into the light for everyone to see. And this time, the answer would not be a quiet phone call from an offended insider, or a polite black box dropped onto the screen by nervous executives. This time, the answer would arrive as a public warning that named the two of them directly, that pointed to the fate of another man who had been killed for a similar act, and that left little doubt about what it was suggesting could happen to them. Section 8. The two episodes that brought real threats. By the spring of 2010, the show was closing in on a milestone that very few television programs ever reach. It was about to air its 200th episode. Most shows mark such a moment with something gentle, a celebration, a look back, a warm thank you to the fans. Parker and Stone chose a different kind of celebration. They decided to use the milestone to march straight back into the one subject they had been blocked from before, the subject that had become the single most dangerous thing in their entire line of work. They were going to confront the whole tangled question of Muhammad head on, and they were going to do it across two connected episodes. The tension around drawing the founder of Islam had only grown in the years since the network first blacked out their screen. The drawings printed by that European newspaper had set off waves of protest and violence across the world, and a few years after that, more drawings by another artist had stirred the same anger all over again. The simple act of showing Muhammad had become, by 2010, one of the most charged acts a person could commit in public. People had been threatened over it. Some had been hurt. The whole world treated it as a line that came with real consequences. Parker and Stone, having been forced to back down once, wanted to drag the entire hypocrisy of the situation out into the open where everyone could see it. The way they built the story was clever. Maybe the cleverest setup they ever cooked up. For the 200th episode, they brought back nearly every famous person and nearly every wild storyline the show had ever produced over its long run. All the celebrities the show had mocked across the years, furious at how they had been treated, band together into one giant angry group and threatened to sue the entire town. The townspeople face being wiped out by the lawsuit unless they can meet one strange demand. The celebrities want the town to hand over the Prophet Muhammad. The reason behind that demand is where the genius lies. In the made-up logic of the story, Muhammad possesses a special and unique power. He cannot be made fun of. He is completely protected from all mockery, shielded from ridicule in a way no one else is. The angry celebrities, tired of being laughed at by the show for years, want that power for themselves. If they could just get hold of whatever it is that protects Muhammad from being mocked, they could become untouchable too, safe forever from the kind of teasing the show had heaped on them. So the great prize at the center of the whole story, the thing every character schemes and fights to obtain, is the power to never be laughed at. That choice was no accident. Parker and Stone had taken the exact truth of their own situation and turned it into the engine of the plot. In real life, Muhammad was the one figure their show was not allowed to mock, the single protected exception in a program that mocked absolutely everything else. So they wrote a story in which that very protection, the power of not being made fun of, became the most valuable thing in the world, the object of everyone's desire. The episode was, in a sense, about itself. It was about the one rule the show could not break, dressed up as a wild adventure. The town faces an impossible problem. They are ordered to produce Muhammad, but they are not allowed to actually show him. So they get creative. They hide him. First, they smuggle him around inside a moving truck, keeping him out of sight. Then, when he has to be presented, they dress him head to toe in a full bear mascot costume, the kind of fuzzy suit a person might wear at a sports game, so that he can be physically present in the scene without his actual image ever appearing. It was a sly trick, a way to put the character into the story while technically keeping him completely covered. Around all of this swirled the usual chaos, with other strange groups also wanting to get their hands on Muhammad, including the show's running joke about a band of red-haired children, and even a giant robot version of a famous singer stomping through the mayhem. The first of the two episodes aired in the middle of April in 2010. The disguised bear-suited Muhammad appeared, and at first, the biggest visible change seemed to be the usual bleeping of swear words. The episode was ambitious and packed with references, a real celebration of everything the show had been. For a few days, it looked like Parker and Stone had pulled it off, off, that they had found a way to tackle the forbidden subject and get away with it. Then the danger that had always been a vague possibility became something real and named. Within a week of that episode airing, a small and extreme group based in New York posted a warning on their website. The warning did something none of the earlier pressures had done. It named Parker and Stone directly, the two real men, and it stated that they risked being murdered for what they had done in showing Muhammad. The post pointed to a real and terrible example to make its meaning clear. It referred to a filmmaker in the Netherlands who had been killed in 2004 after he made a film criticizing how Muslim women were treated, and it included a disturbing image connected to his death. The author of the post claimed that he was not making a threat, only offering a warning about what would likely happen. Almost everyone who read it understood it for what it plainly was. The threat of violence, which had hovered over this subject for years as a distant idea, had now been spoken out loud, posted in public, and aimed straight at two real people by name. What happened next is the moment the entire long story of the show's battles with censorship reaches its peak. The second of the two episodes was supposed to air the following week and bring the whole storyline to its conclusion. The network, frightened by the threat, took control of the situation. Comedy Central heavily censored that second episode, and it did so without the approval of the men who made the show. Every spoken mention of the name Muhammad was bleeped out across the entire episode. The character was covered over with a large black box bearing the single word censored, hiding even the bare-suited figure from view. The network was no longer just refusing to show one image at one moment. It was scrubbing the name and the figure out of the whole episode. Then the network did something that stunned nearly everyone who saw it. At the end of the episode came the closing speech, the part where the show traditionally delivers the moral, the point of the whole story. This speech ran for about 2 minutes, and it carried the heart of everything the two-part story had been building toward. The network bleeped all of it. Every single word of that closing speech was covered over, an unbroken wall of bleeps where the message should have been. The audience heard nothing but the sound of censorship for 2 full minutes at the most important moment of the story. And here lies the cruelest twist in the entire saga. That closing speech, the one the network erased completely, did not even mention Muhammad, not once. The speech was about fear itself. It was about intimidation, about how giving in to threats only teaches people that threats work, about how a person cannot accomplish anything if they let themselves be ruled by fear. It was a message against caving to violence, and the network bleeped every word of it, because the network was, in that very moment, caving to violence. A speech warning against surrendering to fear was silenced by an act of surrendering to fear. The thing the speech warned against happened to the speech itself, live, in front of everyone watching. Many people who saw the wall of bleeps assumed it had to be a clever joke by Parker and Stone, the show winking at its own situation, pretending to be censored as a bit of comedy. That assumption was wrong. The network, not the show, had done it. Comedy Central later confirmed that the bleeps had been inserted by the network and not by the creators. A spokesperson for the channel said they could not explain the reasoning behind the decision, but confirmed plainly that it was the network's choice to add the bleeps. Parker and Stone made it clear that they had not censored their own message. The network had done it to them, against their wishes, erasing the very point they were trying to make. After the dust settled, the 2 episodes simply disappeared. Both of them were pulled from reruns. They were removed from the show's own official website, the place where fans had long been able to watch episodes freely. They were taken out of the streaming services. They were even left out of the big collection of the show released on disc, where every other episode lived. These 2 episodes became some of the only ones in the entire history of the show that a person could not get through normal legal means at all. They had been made, aired once in a damaged and censored form, and then quietly erased. Years later, a clever person discovered that an uncensored copy of the second episode had been left sitting on the show's own computer servers, forgotten, and managed to pull it down and share it. But through official channels, the episodes were gone. The network never even publicly acknowledged the leak. For all of that, the 2 episodes were good enough that they earned a nomination for one of television's biggest awards that year. The work was recognized as excellent even as it was being buried. That contrast says something on its own. These were not weak episodes that deserved to vanish. They were strong, ambitious, widely praised, and they were erased anyway, not because of any flaw in them, but because of the fear that surrounded their subject. This is the moment where the whole pattern of the show's censorship comes to its sharpest and clearest point. Across the years, the show had been silenced in many ways. A ratings group had fussed over words and titles. A movie star had quietly pulled strings inside the company. A religious group had reached an insider with power. The network itself had blacked out a screen out of caution. But this was the moment it all came together and showed its true face. A real, named threat of violence had been made against two real men, and the network responded by erasing not only the forbidden image, but the show's entire argument against giving in to fear, and then by making the episodes vanish almost completely. The thing being protected was never about offense, and by now, that truth was impossible to deny. The same show was allowed to soil Jesus in the crudest way imaginable. On the holiest week of the Christian year, it was allowed to say the most hateful word in the language dozens of times without a single bleep. It was allowed to mock every faith, every leader, every figure a person could name in the harshest terms. The single thing it could not do was show one disguised image of one religious figure, because that one image might get someone killed. Offense was always free. The only true censor was danger. And the detail that ties it all together, the one that reveals just how aware Parker and Stone were of their own trap, is the heart of their story. They built a two-part epic in which the most precious thing in the world, the prize that drives the entire plot, is the power to never be made fun of. They knew that Muhammad was the one figure their show could not mock, so they made that exact inability the engine of the whole adventure, letting every character chase after the one protection the show itself could not break. It was a story about the limit of the show, told by the show at the very moment that limit was being enforced on it more harshly than ever before. Many critics looked at what the network had done and warned of where it would lead. They argued that giving in to a threat like this would only teach the world a dangerous lesson, that frightening people into silence works. If a single warning posted on a website could make a network erase episodes, scrub a name, and bleep an entire speech, then anyone willing to make a scary enough threat had been handed real power over what could and could not be shown. The network's choice, made out of genuine fear for the safety of real people, seemed to prove those critics right. Fear had won, openly and completely, and everyone watching had seen it happen. By this point, the show had been pushed around by nearly every kind of force a person could imagine. A ratings group, a famous star, a religious watchdog, the network that owned it, and finally, the raw threat of violence had all, in their own ways, made the show bend or break. Yet every single one of those forces had one thing in common. They all came from within the same country, from companies and groups and individuals operating under the same set of rules, in the same place, speaking the same language. The fights had all been, in a sense, domestic quarrels. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next time the show pushed too hard, the force that came for it would be something entirely new. It would not be a person or a group or a worried network. It would be an entire nation, a powerful government on the far side of the world. And that government would not be satisfied with quietly pulling one episode from a schedule or bleeping out a name. It would set out to erase the entire show, every season and every episode from existence inside its borders, as if the thing had never been made at all. Section 9. Getting banned by a whole country. Every fight the show had survived up to now had come from inside its own country. A ratings group, a movie star, a religious watchdog, the network that owned it, and a small extreme group making threats had all, in their own ways, tried to push the show into silence. Different as they were, they all operated in the same place, under the same rules, speaking the same language. The next force to come for the show would be nothing like them. It would be one of the most powerful governments on the planet, on the far side of the world, and it would not settle for pulling a single episode. It would try to wipe the entire show out of existence within its borders, as though the thing had never been made. By 2019, the show was deep into its run, more than 20 seasons in, and the world had changed in a way that gave Parker and Stone a fresh target. China had grown into an enormous market for movies and television, a country with so many people and so much money that American entertainment companies were desperate to get in. The trouble was that the Chinese government kept tight control over what its people were allowed to watch. It employed armies of people whose job was to decide what was permitted and to cut out anything the government did not like. To get their films and shows into that huge market, the big American companies began quietly changing their own work to avoid upsetting those government watchers. They softened things, they cut things, they avoided subjects they knew would anger the people in charge over there. They censored themselves willingly for the chance at all that money. This quiet bending had spread across Hollywood, and most companies preferred not to talk about it. Parker and Stone decided to make an entire episode about it. The episode is called Banned in China, and it carries two stories that wind around the same idea. The first follows Randy, Stan's father, who by this point in the show runs owns a farm where he grows and sells the drug marijuana. Looking to grow his business, Randy travels to China to sell his product there. It goes badly. He is caught and thrown into a harsh Chinese work camp, a kind of prison where people are forced to labor. Inside that camp, he meets two unexpected fellow prisoners, the beloved children's characters Winnie the Pooh and his little friend Piglet, locked up by the Chinese state. As the story goes on, Randy slowly becomes part of the very system that imprisoned him, helping carry out China's wishes out of cowardice and out of a desire to protect his own business. In one dark turn, to please his Chinese hosts, Randy even lures the gentle, honey-loving bear to his death, using a pot of honey as the bait. The second story follows Stan and a few of his friends, who start a heavy metal band. A movie producer wants to make a film about their band, the kind of movie that tells the story of real people's lives. But the producer explains that for the film to make any real money, it has to please the Chinese government watchers or it will never be allowed into that lucrative market. So as Stan tries to make his movie, Chinese officials are constantly on set, editing his story, changing his scenes, and cutting anything that might upset their government. They hand him a list of subjects he is not allowed to touch. He cannot mention a certain religious leader that the Chinese government treats as an enemy. He cannot mention gay people. He cannot mention a particular sensitive medical subject, and he cannot mention Winnie the Pooh. Stan watches his own film get twisted into something he does not recognize, until finally he refuses to go along with it any longer, choosing to keep his honesty rather than sell it off for Chinese approval. The reason a harmless cartoon bear sits at the center of all this is rooted in something real. A couple of years before the episode aired, people in China had begun comparing Winnie the Pooh to the country's leader, joking that the round, soft bear looked like President Xi Jinping. The government did not find it funny. It scrubbed the bear from the country's social media, blocking the comparison, treating a children's character as a kind of threat because of who he resembled. In the episode, Piglet even explains the situation plainly, saying that because some people thought Pooh looked like the president, they were now illegal in China. Parker and Stone took that strange real-life fact and made the bear the perfect symbol of everything China was willing to censor. A gentle, innocent character treated as dangerous simply for an accidental resemblance. The episode aimed its sharpest jabs not only at China itself, but at the American companies that bowed to it. It showed how the biggest names in entertainment had quietly handed control of their content over to a foreign government for the sake of profit. The famous movie company behind so many beloved films was represented in the episode by its own iconic mouse character, shown enforcing China's rules for money, even ordering the death of Winnie the Pooh to keep the government happy. One line in the episode cut straight to the heart of it, pointing out that American children now lived in a time when the only movies they got to see were the ones a foreign government had approved. The episode was less interested in attacking China for being China, and more interested in shaming the American companies that had decided their honesty was worth less than their access to Chinese cash. The timing could not have been sharper. The episode arrived right in the middle of a huge real-world moment that proved its point for it. America's biggest professional basketball league was, at that very same time, caught in its own crisis with China. An executive connected to one of the teams had posted a short message online supporting the people of Hong Kong, who were protesting for more freedom from Chinese control. China was furious. Its national television network pulled the league's games off the air, and the league, terrified of losing the enormous Chinese audience and all the money attached to it, scrambled to apologize. So at the exact moment Parker and Stone released an episode mocking American institutions for groveling before China, the whole country was watching a real American institution do precisely that. The episode and reality lined up so perfectly that the show looked almost prophetic. China responded to the episode in the most extreme way it could. The government did not pull a single episode or block one scene. It erased the entire show. Every season, every episode, all of it was scrubbed from China's streaming apps, its search engines, and its social media. People searching for the show on China's biggest websites found nothing at all, as if it had never existed. On the country's largest social media platform, billions of past posts mentioning the show were wiped away. Inside China, the show was made to simply vanish, deleted from the digital world so thoroughly that a person there might never know it had been made. This was a new kind of silencing, larger in scale than anything the show had faced before. A whole government deleting an entire show from a country of well over 1 billion people in one sweeping motion. Now comes the part that matters most, the part that reveals the true rule running underneath this entire long story. When the show had faced a deadly threat over showing Muhammad, the network had folded, the episodes had been censored and then buried, and fear had plainly won. Faced now with an entire powerful nation erasing them completely, Parker and Stone did the exact opposite of folding. They mocked it. A few days after the ban, they put out out a statement they called an official apology to China, and it was dripping with sarcasm from the first word to the last. They compared themselves to the basketball league that had just groveled, joking that they too welcomed the Chinese government watchers into their homes and their hearts, that they too loved money more than freedom. They mocked the Winnie the Pooh comparison all over again, insisting with a wink that the country's leader looked nothing at all like the bear. They jokingly cheered for the political party that ran China and wished the country a good crop harvest. And then they ended their so-called apology by asking, in plain words, whether everyone was good now. The whole thing was an insult dressed up as a bow, a punishment turned into a joke. And rather than hide from the ban, they used it to promote their next episode, the 300th in the show's history, treating their erasure by a superpower as free advertising. The strangest part of the whole affair was how the ban reached out and caught other people who had done almost nothing. A famous music producer and performer found himself permanently banned from China simply because he had clicked to show that he liked the show's mocking apology online. One small click and an entire nation shut its doors to him. A wildly popular online video maker was banned too, after he made a video supporting the show and joined in the jokes about the country's leader resembling the bear. The punishment rippled outward from the show to anyone who dared to nod along with it, as if agreement itself were a crime. It showed just how seriously the government took the whole matter, and just how far it was willing to reach to stamp out even tiny gestures of support. For all the laughter, the ban did carry a real price, one that proved the episode's own warning to be true. Big technology and entertainment companies that depended on China grew nervous about being tied to the show. One enormous company that might otherwise have wanted to carry the show reportedly backed away from even trying to buy it, because owning something banned in China was bad for business in a market it could not afford to lose. So the ban had teeth after all. It made the show slightly poisonous to any company hoping to stay in China's good graces. The episode had argued that the lure of Chinese money makes American companies cowardly and obedient, and then it watched in real time as companies behaved exactly that way in response to the episode itself. The point did not just land, it came true the moment it was made. Set this whole episode against the battle over Muhammad, and the deepest truth of the show's entire history finally stands fully revealed. For a long time, it was tempting to think the show backed down when something was too offensive, or when the offended party was too powerful. Both of those ideas turn out to be wrong. China is one of the most powerful forces on the entire planet, vastly more powerful than a small radical group posting on a website. The show insulted China deeply again and again, and then mocked it some more after being banned. Parker and Stone did not give an inch. They doubled down and laughed. Yet years earlier, faced with that small group, they and their network had folded completely, censoring the work and burying the episodes. The difference between the two has nothing to do with offense and nothing to do with raw power. It comes down entirely to the kind of threat being made. China could take away money. It could lock the show out of a massive market. It could erase every trace of the show inside its own borders. What China could not do was credibly reach across the world and threaten to kill two men sitting in an office in Colorado. The threat over Muhammad had been a threat to their lives. The threat from China was a threat to their wallets and to their reach. And when the only thing at risk was money, Parker and Stone fought, mocked, and refused to bend, even against one of the strongest governments on Earth. When the thing at risk was a human life, fear won, quietly and completely. That single distinction draws a clean line straight through everything the show ever did. The true limit was never how offensive a thing was. The show soiled Jesus, said the most hateful word in the language dozens of times, mocked every faith and every leader, and insulted an entire superpower to its face. The true limit was never how powerful the angry party was either, since the show happily enraged the most powerful nation on Earth and treated the whole thing as a punchline. The one and only thing that ever truly silenced the show was physical danger, the real and credible possibility that someone would be killed. Everything short of that, no matter how loud, no matter how mighty, the show was willing to fight. That was the rule, hidden in plain sight across more than 20 years of battles, and the China affair laid it bare by showing what the show looked like when its life was not on the line. There is one more layer worth holding onto, because it shows just how aware Parker and Stone were of what they were doing. The episode was about companies censoring themselves out of cowardice and greed, bowing to a foreign power to protect their profits. And the way the world responded to the episode, with companies quietly backing away to avoid angering China, was itself an act of exactly that cowardice and greed. They made a story about people selling their honesty for access, and then they watched, from a distance, as real people sold their honesty for access, rather than be associated with the story. The episode did not merely describe the problem, it became a small, perfect demonstration of it. China had tried to erase the show by force, loudly and completely, and the men who made it had answered just as loudly, turning their punishment into a joke and a billboard. It was censorship met with open defiance, a government's heavy hand met with a shrug and a grin. The show had been deleted from a nation of more than 1 billion people, and its creators could not have seemed to care less. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final disappearance in this whole long story would happen in the opposite way. It would be quiet. There would be no threat hanging over anyone, no angry protest in the streets, no foreign government, and no furious phone call. A small handful of episodes would simply slip out of existence inside an ordinary business deal, the kind signed in a boardroom with handshakes. The arrangement would be agreed to ahead of time by everyone involved, including this time, the men who made the show. And when those episodes quietly vanished, almost no one would notice they were gone at all. Section 10. The 5 episodes that quietly vanished. After the loud, defiant battle with China, the last chapter of the whole story arrives almost in a whisper. There is no threat hanging over anyone in this one. There is no protest in the streets, no angry phone call, no foreign government, no black box dropped onto a screen by frightened executives. The final disappearance in the show's long history of censorship happened so quietly that most people never even notice it taking place. And that quietness, that complete lack of drama, is exactly what makes it the most haunting part of the entire tale. By the time this happened, the way people watched television had changed almost completely. For most of the show's life, fans had watched it the old way, catching new episodes when they aired and stumbling onto reruns whenever a channel decided to play them. By the late part of the previous decade, that world was fading. People had moved to watching shows on apps, streaming whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it. In this new world, a show's entire collection of episodes became a single valuable thing, a library that companies would pay staggering amounts of money to carry. Owning the right to stream a beloved show could draw huge numbers of subscribers, and the bidding for popular libraries grew fierce. The show's library was one of the most valuable around. More than 300 episodes, built up over more than 2 decades, made it a prize any streaming company would want. In 2019, a large company made a deal to become the exclusive online home of the show. The amount of money involved was enormous, reportedly as much as $500 million, and the deal pulled the show away from the app that had been carrying it before. When the new app launched in 2020, the show's whole long history went up onto it. Every season, every storyline, hundreds upon hundreds of episodes, all in one place for fans to stream. The collection was nearly complete. Nearly. 5 episodes did not make it onto the new app. Out of the entire massive library, 5 were left behind, quietly absent, simply not there. And the 5 that were missing tell the whole story of this series all on their own, because every one of them had appeared earlier in this very tale. There was Super Best Friends, the episode from 2001 where the show first drew Muhammad openly and freely, back when the world was calm and nobody complained. There were both parts of Cartoon Wars, the 2006 episodes where the network blacked out its own screen rather than show the founder of Islam. And there were 200 and 201, the 2010 episodes that brought the real named threats of violence and ended with an entire closing speech bleeped into silence. All 5 of these episodes shared one single thing in common. Every one of them depicted Muhammad, the exact thread that had run through the entire history of the show's hardest fights. The one forbidden image turned out to be the precise thread that decided which episodes would be left out of the new streaming home. Out of 300 episodes that mocked nearly everything a person could name, the only ones cut were the handful that touched the single subject the show had never been allowed to touch freely. The pattern that had shaped 20 years of battles drew its final line right here, choosing which 5 episodes would be quietly set aside. What makes this moment so different from everything that came before is the complete absence of a fight. In every earlier chapter, someone had to push. A ratings group fussed. A movie star pulled strings. A religious group reached an insider. The network stepped in out of fear. A small group made threats. A government tried to erase the show by force. Each removal had a villain, or at least an opponent, someone applying pressure against someone else. Here, there was no opponent at all. The studio that makes the show was fully in agreement with leaving the 5 episodes off the new app. Nobody had to be persuaded. Nobody had to be bullied. The decision to hold these episodes back had been discussed and settled before before the giant streaming deal was even signed. Everyone involved, including the men who created the show, had quietly agreed ahead of time that these 5 would stay buried. That is the part worth sitting with. The people who had fought so loudly for so many years, who had turned every act of censorship into a joke or an argument or a defiant stand, simply went along with this one without a struggle. There was no statement through a lawyer this time, no mock apology, no clever scene written to expose the hypocrisy. There was only a calm, mutual understanding written into the fine print of a business deal that these episodes would not be part of it. The loudest, most ferocious fighters in the whole story let these 5 go in silence. It helps to understand that the disappearance was not even new when it happened. These episodes had already been missing for years before the big new deal. When the show had streamed on the previous app, the same 5 were absent there too. The habit of keeping them off had been set long ago, quietly maintained as the show passed from one streaming home to the next. The new deal simply carried that old habit forward, the way a person might keep a door locked out of routine, long after they have forgotten exactly why it was locked in the first place. By 2020, a whole generation of younger fans had grown up, able to watch hundreds of episodes and never once these 5. Many of them never even learned that the missing episodes existed. The episodes had slipped into a strange kind of non-existence, still real, still made, but gone from the only place most people ever looked. The episodes were never actually destroyed. They survived on the physical discs of their seasons, the collections people could buy and keep on a shelf. Anyone who owned those old discs could still watch all 5 whenever they pleased. There is a small, telling detail in this. The back of a season's disc set would still proudly list the full number of episodes that season contained, but the streaming version of that very same season would show fewer, with the missing episodes simply skipped over in the count, as though they had never been numbered at all. A season that held 14 episodes on disc might show only 12 on the app, the 2 forbidden ones quietly subtracted, leaving a small gap that almost no one would think to question. A couple of the 5 could still be found on the show's own website, but the most controversial of them, the ones that had brought the threats, were essentially gone from every easy, modern way of watching. A fair question hangs over all of this. Why did Parker and Stone, who had spent their entire careers refusing to back down, who had mocked a movie star and a religious watchdog and an entire superpower, go along so quietly this time? Part of the answer is simply exhaustion. Trey Parker had spoken about the Muhammad episodes with real frustration in the years afterward. What bothered him most, he said, was that he believed those episodes turned out genuinely good, some of the best work the show had done, but the whole ordeal had worn the 2 of them down so completely that by the end, they just wanted to move past it and get on with making the next thing. After years of threats, of censored speeches, of episodes erased and battles fought, the will to keep fighting over these particular episodes had drained away. Agreeing to leave them off was the path of least resistance, the quiet conclusion of a fight that had already cost more than it was worth. A former leader of the network had explained years before that the censoring and pulling of the threatened episodes had always come down to safety, to the real danger those threats represented. The choice to keep the episodes buried simply carried that same reasoning forward into a calmer time, without any new storm to force it. As the years rolled on, the arrangement held firm. The show moved between streaming homes again, the apps changed their names, the business of it all shifted and reshuffled, and through every change, the 5 episodes stayed gone. The quiet burial proved to be the most lasting of all the show's many removals. This is the strangest part when measured against everything that came before. The Bloody Mary episode, pulled in a storm of Catholic anger, had eventually come back to the air. The Scientology episode, yanked from a rerun under a movie star's pressure, had eventually returned too. Even the episodes pulled in the loudest, most frightening moments had often found their way back once the heat died down. But these 5, removed without any storm at all, agreed to peacefully by everyone, stayed gone in a way the others never did. The loud removals were temporary. The quiet one was permanent. This brings the whole long story to its deepest and most uncomfortable truth. The final form of censorship, it turns out, is not a bleep or a black box. It is not an angry crowd or a furious government. It is a quiet absence, written into a business deal, agreed to in advance, and noticed by almost no one. The loudest, fiercest fights in the show's entire history did not end with a dramatic last stand or a triumphant return. They ended with a calm handshake in a boardroom and a small gap in a list of episodes. The thing that finally won completely and permanently did not need to shout. It only needed everyone to grow tired enough to stop fighting. And here sits the bitter heart of it, the irony that gives this whole chapter its weight. The episodes that were most thoroughly and most permanently erased are the very ones that argued hardest against giving in to fear. The Cartoon Wars episodes were, at their core, a passionate plea never to let the threat of violence decide what can be shown. A warning that the moment you carve out one exception out of fear, you hand power to anyone willing to make a threat. The 200 and 201 episodes ended with a speech, the one the network bleeped into silence, that was entirely about how surrendering to intimidation only invites more of it. Those exact episodes, the ones preaching courage in the face of fear, are now the ones that can never be easily seen. They were removed so completely and so quietly that most fans do not even know they exist. The message of those episodes and the fate of those episodes point in opposite directions. The work argued for standing firm, and the work itself was quietly set aside for the sake of safety and peace. The episodes that told the world not to cave became, in the end, the casualties of caving, buried not by a single act of force, but by everyone's gentle, mutual agreement that it simply was not worth the risk anymore. They preached against the slippery slope, and then they slid down it, out of sight with hardly a sound. This completes the line that the China chapter had begun to draw. The one and only thing that ever truly and lastingly silenced the show was physical danger, the real possibility that someone could be hurt or killed. And here, in this final quiet chapter, that danger won its most complete victory. Not through a threat made in the heat of a moment, but through a calm decision made years later in a peaceful room, that the danger had been real enough to make these episodes permanently not worth keeping. The fear did not even need to be present anymore. The memory of it was enough. The threat had been made once, a decade earlier, and its shadow was still long enough, all those years later, to keep 5 episodes locked away forever, with the full and quiet agreement of the very men who had once fought so hard to make them. Across more than 20 years, the show had been pushed and pulled by nearly every force a person could name. It had been bleeped by a ratings group and blacked out by its own network. It had been yanked from schedules by a movie star and a religious group. It had been threatened with violence and erased by a foreign nation. And at the very end, it had been quietly buried by a handshake. Each of these battles, taken on its own, looks like a separate story, a one-time clash with a different opponent over a different episode. But when the whole long parade of them is laid side by side and looked at together, all the noise and all the chaos resolve into a single, clear shape. There is one rule hidden underneath every fight that explains every retreat the show ever made and every act of defiance it ever threw back. That rule, drawn out of more than 2 decades of battles, is what the last part of this story is for. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.